Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It's episode 2577 of The Tom Woods Show, and I have two esteemed gentlemen with me today to talk about a matter of very great importance. The fate of a man's life hangs in the balance of what we're talking about today. It really, really, really matters. And at the end, and indeed throughout this conversation, we are going to call on people listening and watching to take a specific action. And I would like you to take the 15 seconds that it takes to do that, because justice absolutely demands it. We're talking about a man named Roger Ver, whom I've had on the Tom Woods Show. That is the least of his credentials. I'm going to have Steve Patterson tell you a little bit more about Roger. But as I say, whether or not he spends the rest of his life in prison is hanging in the balance here of this conversation. So Steve Patterson is the co-author of a book with Roger called Hijacking Bitcoin, The Hidden History of BTC, which of course is shorthand for Bitcoin. And we're also joined by the great Robert Barnes, my favorite legal commentator in all the world. His law center is the 1776 Law Center. This is the latest case he's taken on. And I want to just jump right in. We're going to start actually with Steve. If you can please help us understand what we need to know about Roger for this particular situation. I will say that I personally met him in 2013 when he and Eric Voorhees took me out for lunch and said, "It is a crime, Dr. Tom Woods, that you don't know anything about Bitcoin. We're going to fix that." And they took me out for lunch and they completely convinced me. So I've always had a kind of sentimental, happy feelings about Roger Ver, because that was a very great decision that I made back in 2013. So gentlemen, let's start with Steve. Tell us about your book and about Roger.
Well, so Roger Ver earned the nickname Bitcoin Jesus. I know he's uncomfortable with his nickname, but I actually think in interacting with him over the last several years, it's kind of apt. He's sort of in a position now where he is kind of being persecuted, and he's like the super soft-spoken, nice, kind guy. It sort of looks like he's being crucified at the moment. So I think Bitcoin Jesus is kind of a good nickname for him, but he's been around since literally the very beginning of Bitcoin. A bunch of people who are longtime Bitcoiners will know that he was arguably the most influential public figure in talking about why Bitcoin is important for libertarians in particular, that Bitcoin could be an alternative money, an alternative to state currencies. And it was very inspirational. He's deeply studied in Austrian economics, and he was the world's first investor in a bunch of Bitcoin startups. So the Bitcoin world owes a lot to Roger Ver. And it's not just the Bitcoin world, it's also the libertarian world. So he's been a private funder of a bunch of very important projects. Behind the scenes, he doesn't call a lot of attention to himself, but libertarians, whether they know it or not, they have benefited greatly from the man who is currently being persecuted by the US government. And, he, in terms of the book, Hijacking Bitcoin, which we recently wrote, I was able to do most of the writing for the book, but it was very easy to do because he was so inspirational and influential that I already sort of knew Roger's philosophy on Bitcoin and his philosophy of libertarianism and trying to bring a free currency to the world. So it was easy to write it for him because he had inspired my own philosophy about Bitcoin, and a bunch of early Bitcoiners also sort of drew our understanding of what Bitcoin is and its importance from this man.
Let me say, first of all, let's talk about what exactly is it that they're saying that he did. It has to do with taxes. Which one of you wants to just lay that out so we understand it?
Oh, sure. So it's not a coincidence that they're going after him for taxes. Taxes has always been the example or exemplar governments use and states and societies use to target dissidents. Our country, of course, famously founded on tax protests. And yet we still had the IRS trying to put people in prison for disagreeing with them about tax laws until the Supreme Court decided in Cheek versus the United States, can't do that. America was founded. We don't have debtors' prisons, not supposed to. Don't have dissenters' prisons, not supposed to. And so now anybody that's followed the libertarian movement or other political independent movements throughout American political history will be fully cognizant that you don't have to listen to Malice and to Tom to get your education about maybe not all bills work the way they say they're going to. And in the same way, in the same framework, the tax laws are supposedly designed to maximize revenue, even though we live in a government and society that now can print whatever it wants in terms of the U.S. government. So what exactly is the economic purpose behind all of this? That is an ongoing subject of debate of many people. Well, why exactly do you have tax laws that don't appear to be designed mostly to raise revenue and balance budgets, that appear to be more like control techniques? So what Rogers sort of stumbled into was two different aspects. One is he is very much as described from people that I know of that are aware of him. Is very naive and very idealistic, like a lot of your first original true blue Bitcoin believers. People that, hey, this mechanism has the tool, the power to defang the state, to defed the Fed, to defund the central planners and central banks, as our mutual friend George Gammon likes to refer to them as. So in that context, here you have Roger Ver, this very naive, nice, outspoken guy saying, hey, why don't we use Bitcoin to empower the entire world? Wouldn't that be interesting? Just walking around a very naive, idealistic, happy-go-lucky kind of libertarian. And the U.S. government was like, well, we're going to take a different approach to that. And so the first thing they do is they look at I've just looked at what's publicly available currently in the public files. But I was still shocked because I do a lot of criminal tax cases, have done for a long time. And I started out doing tax cases because they were political cases. People that were being targeted for political reasons, even though on paper they were tax charges. The tax is the worst at this. And so I looked at it like, well, what did Roger do to get him to send him to prison for life? He has been to federal prison before. Turns out Roger's got a history of being a little bit of an agitator. And I was like, well, what got him in trouble when he was just a kid to federal prison, no less? Well, American federal prison is not a very common place to visit. It turned out he got the wrong size fireworks. So, Roger does have experience with the federal legal criminal process. They actually sent him to prison over whether he got the properly regulated fireworks. So as Bitcoin developed, he was like, well, maybe the U.S. government wouldn't be the safest government to always depend upon. So he left the U.S. government. He hasn't been a U.S. citizen for the better part of a decade. This is publicly known and disclosed in these documents. So I was like, how are they criminally prosecuting him for paying tax he doesn't owe for being a citizen of a country he's no longer a citizen of? Like that seems kind of squirrely. So I started to dig in a little bit further, and it gets even weirder. They're trying to convert. We've talked about this before, Tom. They like California is trying to do. They want to do a wealth tax. And what a wealth tax is, for people that don't know it, if you listen to it, it's called a property tax. That's the right legal phrase, right? Not wealth tax. They don't call it my housing residence tax. They call it or property tax is what it should be called. But they want to call it a wealth tax because that way they get away with it. The word income itself is not defined within the Constitution. That has always been controversial. What that means, doesn't that limit Congress's power to tax? At least arguably it does. Congress thinks so. That's why Congress won't define what the word income is. Imagine we have an income tax. It doesn't define the word income. Oh, it's supposed to not happen that way. But of course, don't want to listen to it. So in the middle of all of this walks somebody who's could use Bitcoin to empower the world and defrong the deep state, and at the same time help ordinary people all around the globe have real meaningful financial freedom outside the control of central banks and central planners. And so all of a sudden they decide that he must have committed a tax crime. The problem is they had to go through 4 or 5 different versions of what crime it is before they could find something to charge him with. They ultimately charged him for not paying taxes when he was not a citizen, for not paying taxes on something that they said at the time was not taxable. And that's the summation of it. I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is obviously punitive and retaliatory prosecution. We live in the era where they try to keep the president of the United States from being reelected president on those grounds. And so it's not a surprise in the environment we're in, but it's still one of the most shocking tax cases I've ever seen just on tax ground. Even if Roger wasn't in the middle of this massive Bitcoin controversy concerning the ability of ordinary people to access it independent of central banks and central planners and trying to empower people. He's sort of the anti-Bill Gates is who Roger Ver is. He's building exit ramps where Gates is building the prison gates. And so, that's why he's being targeted. But the case is, I can say this as someone who's done and had more success in criminal tax than probably any lawyer in the country. It's the craziest, dumbest tax case I've ever seen. It tells you how egregious it is, how bad it is. And that means whatever you think about Roger, whatever you think about Bitcoin, whatever you think about libertarianism, you better be paying attention, because if they can do this to Roger Ver, they will do this to you. Just like if they can do it to the President of the United States, they will do it to you. And so I'm hoping that the newly elected administration wakes up and says, we need to highlight this to the world. Cases like Roger's case, cases like Julian Assange case. There's no reason we can't go back and pardon fully Julian Assange. Go right back and pardon him fully. End of story. Don't let anything linger. Let him travel wherever, whenever, however he wants to travel. Go back in and fully do what he was going to do at the end, as Trump himself has later acknowledged, and pardon the Edward Snowden. And then bring in Ross Ulbricht, who was defended by a buddy of mine in New York, and it was railroaded in that Silk Road case. The investigative cops, once again, caught stealing. It's amazing. Right in the middle of that case. And yet no consequences that Ulbricht got the benefit of. And in the ultimate one, pardon Bitcoin Jesus, when you couldn't get better than that, in my opinion. But why does it matter for you out there, you normies, ordinary everyday people? Is the power of the government to shut down its critics and lock up its dissidents. That's what it's about, the power of financial freedom. It's about the inherent abusive nature of tax laws when they're criminalized. So all of it comes together in Roger's individual case that's going to impact all of our rights.
And another example of this behind-the-scenes influence of Roger regarding Ross is he was one of the big funders of Ross Ulbricht's legal campaign and was for years. So I don't know if people know that, but this is there was so much corruption in that Ross Ulbricht case. It is stunning, and you better bet that that the people involved in that case are keeping track of who's on whose side and who's funding who.
Folks, the more the politicians fiddle with American health care and health insurance, the worse it gets. It's like a law of the universe. It's almost like we could have predicted that. You look at American health insurance, it's a total mess. We all know it. It's expensive and frustrating. It's not getting any better. There are no incentives for it to get better. So surely there has to be some alternative out there. Well, that's why we have Crowd Health. It's not health insurance. It's a better way to pay for health care through crowdfunding. For $175 for an individual or $575 for a family of 4 or more, you'll get access to a community of people who are willing to help out in the event of an emergency. You'll get access to telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, and so much more. And you don't have to worry about doctors' networks getting in the way. Let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. Get started today for just $99 per month for your first 3 months. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code WOODS. Crowd Health is not insurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com. And don't forget code WOODS. Well, let me jump in here. I'm glad that this is why I wanted to have Robert on to talk about this, that he laid this out. There's more detail we can talk in about how do you reckon the value of Bitcoin at a particular moment, especially when it, after Mt. Gox collapsed, it was, if he tried to sell it all, it would send the value tumbling. So how does he really figure out we can get into all that. But having Robert on to say what he just said is very important, because there are times, let's be honest with ourselves, that in our community, you will hear on Twitter or something, people saying something like, this family is being persecuted legally because they homeschool their kids. And at this point, I am jaded enough that I say, nope, that is absolutely not the whole story. Tell me the whole story. And it turns out, well, the family was living in the woods and the kids are feral, and they're eating food, and there's also like a fox eating it or something. They leave these details out. Whereas this really is the case where we really are telling you the whole story. And I was in Buenos Aires last week, and I had a chance to, I don't know, it's a private conversation, so I better not say, but I was talking to somebody that some people may know. It's not Doug Casey, by the way. I did say that I had dinner with him. It wasn't him. But who is not like a conspiracy-oriented person at all. He's not ordinarily inclined in this direction, but he said to me, it is 100% certain and that what's being done to Roger Ver is political persecution. There is no doubt about it in my mind. And he says that as somebody who doesn't share Roger's particular take on Bitcoin. That's all secondary. He just said that there is no doubt about it that that's what's happening, and this has got to be stopped. So, Steve, why don't you take a minute to situate us? Tell us a little bit about what you guys are arguing in that book.
Sure. So this is one of those topics that, despite all the rancor between the Bitcoin factions, I think there is evidence that a lot of people are coming together in defense of Roger. So even if you disagree with Roger and my take on Bitcoin and what has happened to Bitcoin over the last decade or so, a lot of Roger's outspoken opponents are still saying, to their credit, that Roger is indeed being he's a victim here of political persecution. So I think that should be noted. There's a lot of hatred in Bitcoin, but fortunately, there's still enough goodwill where people are acknowledging that, yeah, this is a case that is very important, and Roger should be pardoned. The general idea of hijacking Bitcoin is that there is considerable evidence that we document in the book that the direction that Bitcoin has been going in the past 10 years towards a greater centralization and greater acceptance by the establishment has resulted in it becoming a less powerful tool for empowering individuals. So the more that the Bitcoin narrative has shifted towards, this is supposed to be digital gold that you buy and you hold and you don't use, and you get approval from a KYC exchange in order to buy it in the first place, the more it moves in that direction, that might be good for the price, the more it moves away from what it used to be. The whole idea was, if you remember, Tom, Bitcoin is supposed to be an alternative currency for the masses. This is supposed to be an alternative to state money. And it does not appear that Bitcoin is currently on that trajectory, though the price is appreciated very much. And so we spend, we have, I think there are 287 citations in the book. It's extremely carefully written, trying to tell a story that is very relevant for libertarians in particular, that what Bitcoin is in 2024 truly is not what it was in 2014 or 2011. And the direction that it's gone is one that doesn't seem to be empowering individuals. So, and for that, I might say, libertarians are very aware of the great power that comes from the ability to coin money. That's like, one could argue that the most powerful tool that governments have to exert control over society is the ability to control the money, and the money supply. And so we should expect that the most powerful governments in the world, the most powerful financial establishments and banks in the world, are very aware that Bitcoin could be a threat to their power and to their business model. And what would the world look like if we had a Bitcoin that was successfully corrupted, for example? I'm going to argue, and I think Roger would argue, that version of Bitcoin would look an awful lot like the Bitcoin we actually see in 2024. And it is a remarkable coincidence that less than a month after the book gets published, Roger is then suddenly arrested in Spain. Literally, the beginning of the month, in April, the book is published, and before the month closes, he's sitting in a jail cell. I personally don't think that's a coincidence.
I had both you guys scheduled to appear to talk about the book, and obviously we had to postpone that. I hope it won't be too terribly long. I hope this injustice is overthrown. But a couple things, Robert. If he's not actually, if he hasn't been convicted of anything, is it really a pardon you're asking for, or is it just drop the case against him?
Well, they should drop the case, but the pardon is permanent, and that's the utility. The presidential power of the pardon is one I think Trump needs to really unleash. He considered doing so in his first term. Chose a few symbolic cases, Jack Johnson, and some others, but I think there's a ton more. And I think what I've advised them to do is to form a lawfare task force that has lawyers that are familiar and sophisticated in this area, that understand civil rights abuses, that understand the weaponization of the legal system, that understand the misconduct in the criminal justice process. Because typically speaking, you get lawyers from one side of the spectrum or another that undervalue one aspect of abuse of power or the other. And we want people that are open-eyed and can clearly see it. People like Dershowitz would be great on a task force like that. Doesn't require permanent duty, requires identifying patterns of problems, and take these high-profile cases that tell a story and use them to tell a broader story of here's where some of the flaws are in our system of justice in America. And here's how we can repair and remedy these things in real and meaningful ways. And that I think that the Trump team needs not only a task force to highlight it and to systematize it, but as well to promote those individual cases that will get people's eyeballs. and crisscross political ideological spectrum. So get people from the left, from the right, from Democratic side, Republican side, independent side. Everybody's been a victim. I mean, the irony with Democrats is there's nobody that's a bigger, easier, quicker victim than another Democrat of a fellow Democrat's lawfare. Just ask Mayor Adams. So there's a lot of space there. Let me look at Blago from Illinois has become a Trump advocate and a criminal justice reform advocate after he experienced the other side of that. So you look at somebody like Rogers, got no meaningful criminal history unless you count not buying fireworks the right way. Most of us think that shouldn't be a federal crime. A little bit insane that it was, that Roger of all people was doing time while drug cartels were smuggling kids across the border. But you have somebody who's also significant to a broader community, people that are wanting to make sure Bitcoin maintains its ability to act as financial freedom. There's people who just want to be active politically. I mean, I think what you've seen already with Roger is the path that Elon Musk was on. And Musk was just a few steps ahead of where Roger was. He realized before, because Roger's idealistic, well, we'll just engage the government, that if they have any questions, I can produce proof that's needed, et cetera. That's the normal process. And someone who has done a lot of criminal tax cases, nothing about the Roger Ver case was done according to proper protocol and practice. They violated it, which that almost always means their evidence is crap and they're covering up misconduct. That's just been one history of dealing with it. But that's who these institutions and agencies are. I mean, because a big question, particularly from certain libertarian circles, is Trump going to deliver on his second term? There was concern in his first term that he didn't follow through on his more libertarian-oriented, populist-oriented political promises in areas of foreign policy to the degree he himself said he wanted to deliver. So there's no better chance in some of these cases. The Bitcoin community is the quickest red-pilling community in the world, short of Anthony Fauci showing up at your door and telling you what to do with your life. So and I think, so that's why Roger's case is so significant. And other people reached out to me saying, I'd been talking about this case now for years, but saying, we got to figure out a couple of cases to highlight, like Assange and Snowden, for the new Trump administration, to make this real, make this tangible, to make our civil rights actionable rights. And then they need to transition to looking into misconduct investigations concerning prosecutors, concerning high-ranking political officials, concerning others that were, if Trump makes it about January 6th, then Trump, it'll go nowhere. If he makes it about problems systematically with our system of justice in the United States, then he could benefit a lot of people in the system of justice going forward, as well as expose what happened to him, because he knows as well as anyone what a victim looks like. And so now it's up to him to not re-victimize. And if he wants to restore America's lead in Bitcoin, no better way than to pardon Bitcoin Jesus. But there's a lot of ways, but he's just one example of it. But the reason why Roger matters is his case is so broadly recognized around the world because of its impact in the world of tax and financial and political freedom, because it impacts citizenship. The exit tax is an unconstitutional tax in America. And yet now they're trying to impose it through criminal prosecution. So they've never had the guts to take it up to the U.S. Supreme Court about whether or not they could civilly assess it. And now they're saying, well, you know what? We don't want to go through that route. We want to force somebody to spend 5 years in federal prison before they figure out whether or not it's constitutional or not. I mean, that's one of the things they're trying to do in his case. So his case matters to everybody because of how many freedoms they're trying to touch on just one single case.
And playing off just how crazy this particular case is, where we're talking about the exit tax that happened in 2014. So I was around in the Bitcoin world in 2014. There were virtually no clear legal rules at that time. I mean,
not even from the IRS, because I'd asked the IRS. I was like, tell me in writing, tell my clients, what is it? Is Bitcoin an asset? Is Bitcoin cash? Is Bitcoin currency? What is it? And treat it consistently. Because you don't get to say, okay, we're going to treat it as this kind of asset. Okay, well, here it depreciated dramatically. We got major tax savings. Oh, no. We don't want it to be that kind of asset then. Something. Well, which is it? Well, we want it to be over here. Oh, but that means you don't get the tax the upside. Oh, no. Well, never mind. They couldn't make up their mind for a decade. And now they're going to try to put Roger in prison because the IRS can't make up its own mind about its own taxes?
Exactly. And I remember talking to different people in the industry back in 2013. It's a small industry. And this was an ongoing problem. What do we do with the tax situation? A lot of people chose, we're just going to kick the can down the road, not do anything. And then maybe if the IRS comes calling or they say what the rules are. Then we can say, hey, look, things were unclear. Now we'll try to play by the rules. Roger apparently tried to get way ahead of the curve. I was like, well, I'm going to try to play it by the book anyway, even though there isn't legal clarity here, which is just mind-blowing.
If you're a homeschooling parent, chances are you're working too hard. You've probably heard me talk about the K through 12 video-based self-taught Ron Paul curriculum. I devoted 2 years of my life to creating videos on history and government for that curriculum. So your students will learn directly from me on those subjects. And we have all the traditional subjects, but we also teach things that you would think they would teach in the traditional schools, but for some reason they don't. Like money management. Think people could stand to learn that, or how to run a home business, or how to be an effective public speaker, how to be a well-rounded person, in other words. The middle school science courses the kids absolutely rave about. A lot of times they finish them early and say, can I go on to the 7th grade? Can I go on to the 8th grade? Well, I also have some bonuses for you. If you join the Ron Paul curriculum through my link, I'll give you $160 worth of free bonuses, and you won't get those bonuses anywhere else. You gotta get them through my link only. And my link is ronpaulhomeschool.com. Head over there, get more information, and sign on up and get those bonuses. It's ronpaulhomeschool.com.
Which is supposed to mean you don't criminally prosecute. This has happened before. They tried to prosecute somebody once for donating blood, not properly taxing that. Can you imagine? The IRS once said 1934, Tom. They said, don't be upset about what we take or what we tax. Be happy about what we don't tax. Because they wanted to tax you for cooking in your own home, Tom. So if you're a good cook, you really got to owe some tax.
That sounds like a Darth Vader quote. Don't worry about what we do tax. Worry about what we don't tax. Okay.
Yeah, well, it sounds like George Harrison's Taxman song from the Beatles. But all right, but let's talk about also the procedure they followed with him. Because if it's not exactly uncommon that somebody may assess the value of something differently from how the IRS may assess the value of it, and therefore what degree to which it's taxable. So if he made it, if he, despite consulting experts and being told this is what you should do and doing it, he's being told, well, that's all wrong. But normally a taxpayer would then, what would happen then? You wouldn't have the sorts of things that were done to him culminating in his arrest in Spain.
Oh, not at any level. The normal protocol is there's an extensive, if you have an IRS, particularly in the Bitcoin context, exit tax context. Because there's major problems if you're on the IRS side. One, what's your constitutional right to tax somebody simply because they were once a citizen? That there's no established case law behind it. It's against the history of Anglo-American tax legal principles. And the U.S. law is that you cannot impose a direct tax on a citizen or land, property or person, simply for being a property or person. You have to have income severed from the source, as the Supreme Court chose to redefine it in 1916, when they interpreted the Revenue Act of 1913 to mean what the dissenting justice meant in 1890s. So you get the sort of unusual history of American tax law. But either way, income itself is the only thing that's exempt from that requirement of apportionment. The apportionment is procedurally impossible to do. Because basically means New Yorkers would pay higher taxes than Mississippians and so on and so forth. So it would never practically be enforceable. And it was meant to be the hated head tax. You didn't want to tax for simply existing. That was the goal, is to get rid of that. And second, get rid of the property tax so I could farm without my farm going to the government. And so the income tax is foreign kind of to both. And in that capacity, you're looking at the IRS. Okay, so you've got a tax law that has questions about definition because of the Bitcoin unique issues. You've got issues about exit tax because no longer a U.S. citizen. You have issues about source income. U.S. government is the only government that claims it can tax all income worldwide, globally. The U.S. claims it can tax people on Mars. The only government that claims this. So there's that sort of extraordinary power grab going on. And then even then, you're supposed to go through this detailed civil process where you go through an audit process and you go to tax court, and especially if it involves any what's called novel issue. In other words, if it's an issue that has not been clearly adjudicated or defined, which, by the way, the IRS means to say a Supreme Court decision or a controlling decision within that particular circuit. The IRS to this very day goes around and disagrees with itself and federal courts whenever it feels like it, unless that federal court has made a specific ruling on that specific sub-issue in that specific case. And because tax is so distinct, they can claim no binding precedents ever impact them, which they do routinely. So, I mean, the IRS is arrogant, condescending, disconnected from economic reality, disconnected from any real meaningful legal and constitutional understanding of the constraints on our tax system. And so in that context, they would normally never refer a case of novel interpretation of novel tax laws, of novel application to someone without any criminal history of any consequence, and try to put him in prison for life. And yet that's what they're trying to do to Roger Ver. It's why he's appropriately named in this case, Bitcoin Jesus.
So where exactly do things stand? Like, what's the next thing that's going to happen?
So the government has issued the indictment because that's been publicly disclosed. And so at this point, and then they sought his extradition in Spain. So what can happen is if we follow the Spain court, so I've helped out with extraditions around the world. And in Spain, any Spanish citizen can file a criminal complaint of a con. So it varies by jurisdictions where you can do this. There's some states in America where you can do it, by the way. Don't want to give anybody any good ideas, though. All of a sudden, Anthony Fauci gets indicted in 30 different counties across America. The world celebrates. But there would be challenges within that. And I'm very curious, very, very curious, whether some very high-ranking political officials at the tax division deliberately misled the entire world about the case. And the reason that I've done so many of these cases over the years, that you start to detect patterns. And when something is, sometimes don't look for something that is there, look for something that should be there that's not. And I found that often leads to a path. And it suggested to me they likely stole some attorney-client files they didn't have a right to, and that the evidence rebuts what they claim that they said to the Spanish government, which means, once again, you have the U.S. government involved in another foreign policy scandal, lying to try to kidnap somebody, just like they just tried to do to Julian Assange. It looks like they tried to do the same thing to Roger Ver, is my early prediction of what we're going to find out when the new Spanish court files get processed. And that's just from 20 years of doing this kind of work.
Can you say something about this claim? I tried to read through what has been publicly released, and there's a line where they're talking about mail fraud. And I'm trying to figure out what this mail fraud charge is. And from my understanding, Roger's being threatened with like 20 years as a maximum sentence for mail fraud because, if I understand, he filed the aforementioned taxes through the physical mail. Surely that's not right.
That's all they're claiming, yes. And they occasionally try to sneak in mail fraud charges, in RICO charges, as tax charges in disguise because of how much you can enhance the sentencing. And so that's all that is. There's no allegation of fraud whatsoever against Roger anywhere, any place, at any time that I found. It appears to be he's a purely political target because of all the ancillary political benefits they would get independent of his name. By being able to establish a precedent that we can now, the IRS can now enforce new novel interpretation of tax law by locking you up. Instead of going through tax court, instead of going through audits, they just imprison you. So you better agree with our interpretation of tax law or you're going to jail. That's the message they're sending through Roger Ver's case, and it was one of the many scary messages they want to send the world through his case.
Does he have any kind of a gag order? Like, is he not allowed to speak or what?
Everything's sealed in the federal court case. So all we know about is what's been publicly disclosed in Spain. And that's when the extradition request was posed. That's when the indictment was disclosed. So that's where we have some information. Now, I do know some of the DOJ prosecutors involved. And one of them is a guy that's very ambitious and would be just the kind of guy to lie, just to be blunt about it. In my cases, if it's a political case, in other words, it's a case that people are going to pay attention to the headlines, more than half the time, somebody on the government's team will cheat. They can't help themselves. And Roger's so nice and naive by what I've seen in the court of public opinion. He's like the opposite of the Russian oligarchs. Like these Bitcoin guys that got real successful, you got a good number of them. They're just these naive, idealistic dreamer types, versions of the Russian oligarchs, like the who made it out in the 90s in that sort of cowboy land. So, but he's sort of the more naive, idealistic type than the other type. But they should have never gone after him, and they should get rid of it quickly. And it's an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment to the Trump administration that the Assange case kept going the whole time he was there. It's now he can fix some of these things. And one of the ways he can fix them is to pardon Bitcoin Cash, to get Ross Ulbricht out yesterday, pardon Julian Assange, finish that business up, pardon Edward Snowden, finish that business up, and then pull Tulsi Gabbard over, Director of National Intelligence, where she was originally put on the terror watch list, and she can supervise those people for a little while.
Well, unfortunately, he's surrounded himself once again with people who are hostile to Assange and hostile to Snowden. It looks like at least a handful of them. So once again, he's going to have to fight with his own people to do things that he might, I don't know if he wants to do them or not. I can't figure the guy out.
Well, my instinct for people around him is he does, because he was talking about this in the summer. And because he reached out to me and some other people, and he was like, what can we do? Maybe even put together something for the convention. And it was still going to occur at the convention, and the assassination attempt happened. That sort of derailed everything for the convention story framework. But because he was talking about Amos Miller, the Amish farmer case, his team was talking about multiple cases where they want to put it in a broader context. We need to systematically reform things. And you're right. What you're seeing in his camp are idealists and revolutionaries. Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, people along those people, like I think Thomas Massey may end up in the cabinet before all is said and done. The people like that. Some people that are in between, and then some old school establishment types. And how does that shake out? And that's what we're all waiting to see. And that's where I think the power of the pardon should be utilized by Trump. One, he wants to do it for the January 6th defendants, but he's got to have a bunch of other people in there, or the media will just make it a January 6th case.
Yeah, and they can't just be rappers this time. They got to be
exactly. Really mix it up. Like, I would take a look at, I know several high-profile Native Americans. People know about Peltier and some others, but there's others that I know about. They really were kind of wrongfully prosecuted. There's people prosecuted for just dumb and stupid stuff. You didn't get your third permit before fishing at that part of the lake. That kind of crap. There's a bunch of those kind of cases. There's farmers that have been put out of business. There's ordinary people that have been threatened to be put out of business. In multiple ways that can be restored back to their potential rights and remedies, but also remind the American public, here's some of the problem. That what happened to Trump, what happened to January 6th happened because our system was slowly atrophying, and we need to fix it. And it just happened to have perfect sort of rhetorical reference of Trump pardons Bitcoin Jesus. I mean, it's hard for Trump to miss that headline. But we all need to be on board on these cases because otherwise, you're right. The wrong side will get back the power, and we'll be back to scratch all over again. I mean, there was optimism for Reagan amongst your old school conservative, more libertarian types for about, a month? And then Poppy Bush came in and cleaned house. And all of a sudden, Mark Felt, of all people, is the one getting the pardon. The man who was deep-throated himself is the one who gets the pardon. So I think that's where it's critical we continue to push. There'll be people pushing on Trump on both sides. I think Trump wants to have a legacy that is reform and revolution. And that's why people like Vivek and Elon and Robert Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard are even in the room. But he is fighting and entrenched in town that is willing to crush anybody, any place, anywhere, anytime, just to make the point that it can. That's why the point is, if we can crush Roger Ver, we can crucify Bitcoin Jesus. Imagine what we can do to poor man's Bitcoin Jesus. And that's why it's bigger and broader than even his case.
What's the website that everybody listening to this thing needs to go to right now?
It's freerogernow.org. That's where you're going to see a petition there that you can sign that already is gathering thousands of signatures. I think it's being, that's like the hub for updates about him. And I know I wanted to say one more thing on your point, Robert, about the politics involved is I saw when Ross Ulbricht was originally arrested, the media had a heyday saying this was a murder for hire, criminal kingpin. Over a period of only a few years, honestly, it was pretty amazing how quickly the narrative shifted. Ross Ulbricht is now like a homegrown hero. I mean, this is a case which has leaked out into the mainstream. This isn't just for Bitcoiners and libertarians. This is now something that whoever gets to pardon Ross first, maybe if it's Biden, he could get a little political win for himself. But that's going to be an unambiguous political win. So it may seem like it's, in the weeds now, even as a Bitcoin thing or as a libertarian thing, but we've already seen, Ross has demonstrated, these can be political victories for the public at large, especially when you got a nickname like Bitcoin Jesus. That's just perfect.
Oh, no doubt about it. And it can help bring the maximum pressure and the institutional reform we need if liberty is going to last. Because what liberty needs is institutional protection from the state more than anybody. And there's no better example than what the Biden administration was trying to do. They even picked up, ask yourself, they picked up the Polymarket CEO right after the election because they were antagonized that there was a counter narrative developed at in honest election markets in the last 2 weeks that showed Trump should be the winner. And then they picked up not WeChat, but the Ruski Telegram. They picked up the Telegram guy just traveling through France, who thought he was friends with the French Prime Minister Macron. And so you look at all of this, and what you're witnessing is an effort to completely crush any degree of dissonance. Yes. And then you go after Elon Musk, like the Brits did for a brief period of time, like the French did for a brief period of time. So what they're doing to Roger Ver is, because Ver is not a publicity seeking guy, and he doesn't have like this massive team out there organizing for him, we haven't heard about it. But I've been trying to talk about it. Now more people realize this case is as important as any other case. And we've got to start, and we've got to put it in cascading motion. Get this ball rolling so we can highlight. Hey, if I were Trump, I would every week have a new partner of somebody new to highlight, somebody distinct, different, unique.
Hold up the pardon in front of the camera, right?
Absolutely. Tell part of the story, make it visual. That does say, here's where the system went wrong. Here's where I want it fixed and remedied. So connect it to the tangible and the intangible. And I think, and then you could start to have confidence in our justice system. Because it's too bad that Matt Gaetz stepped down as quickly as he did, because the Justice Department needs its house cleaned because it's become the Injustice Department. And so the FBI needs its house cleaned, the 7th floor for sure. And the reality is 51 former FBI intelligence agents that need to take a little tour for their own prison cell for what they said and did and tried to influence in 2020.
All right, look, I do a lot of episodes with authors, and at the end, I have a call to action. Go buy this person's book. But it's a gentle suggestion, typically. If you're not interested in that book, don't go buy it. But in this case, I really am going to say, look, it's going to take you 15 seconds. freerogernow.org. I've done it. Just add your name, freerogernow.org. And let's try to build some momentum here, because I know this guy. He's a good guy. I wouldn't say we're not close friends, but we are friends. We are certainly very, very favorable acquaintances at the very least. He's been very good and kind to me and to everybody I know, and he does not deserve to spend his life behind bars. That would be an unspeakable injustice. And all you have to do is take 15 seconds out of your day and go to freerogernow.org and just help him out. 15 seconds is all it takes. Gentlemen, any last words?
No,
well, not last words, but like for this episode.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah, exactly. I think Roger's case is everybody's case. In fact, it's, taxes, the power to tax is the power to destroy. The power to tax, the power to surveil. And so it's not a coincidence that they're at the intersection of those two areas: financial control through Bitcoin and currency alternatives, and through the tax system, and citizenship and surveillance, and the way that can interwork. Roger sits at the centerpiece of all of them. And whether our freedoms will be protected will be recognized in how well Roger's freedoms are ultimately protected. So in order to discourage and deter them from taking away our freedoms, we need to protect Roger's now.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add. Well, very well put, Robert. Thank you. Thank you both very much for taking your time to do this and for caring so much. It's nice that when circumstances like this happen, this was kind of shocking for me, just having worked with him, writing a book, trying to do some podcast interviews, and then suddenly he disappears. I don't know what happened. Turns out he's in jail. It's very reassuring to know that there are people out there who actually care about this. This is not a forgotten thing, and he's in a dungeon and now nothing, he's gone forever. It's like there really is a network of people that care, and that is very reassuring. So thank you both.
Well, thanks to both of you very much for your time today and for your work for Roger. The website, ladies and gentlemen, is freerogernow.org. And thank you all very much.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.